Need proof I like what I drive to be practical? Well then look no further than my Golf wagon. Seriously though, this is the same reason I love minivans, and I can promise you that if I had kids of my own, there would be one of those pantheons of practicality with my name on the ownership. And when I say minivans are more practical than SUVs, that's not just my subjective opinion, that is fact. But I'm also objective and open-minded enough to know that they aren't perfect. So with that in mind, here are 3 reasons minivans are better than SUVs and 3 reasons they aren't. The Oxford Dictionary defines practical as relating to the actual doing or use of something rather than theory. Do I even need to continue here? Sure, that 3-row SUV might make sense in theory, but when it's time to do stuff, it's just not as good, plain and simple. Take the space inside. Unless you're going to step up to a full-size family hauler like the Chevy Tahoe, there's no way you're getting an SUV this roomy, and even that's debatable. Just take a look at that Toyota Sienna. It's got 950 liters of cargo room behind the 3rd row, including a deep well that's like a magician's hat with all the stuff you can pull out of there. The Tahoe has more than 200 liters less, and the lift-over height means you've got to lug your stuff up and inside. And it only gets worse when you look at smaller 3-rows like the Volkswagen Atlas, which are a hell of a lot more popular and have even less space for stuff. Actually, there's less room for people too. Point minivan. Kids aren't reckless little creatures, well, at least not all of them, but even the best of the brood can be prone to the occasional act of carelessness. And that's exactly why the sliding doors on a minivan are amazing. No need to leave a note explaining that your kid accidentally dented the door of the car parked next to you at the mall. Those doors are power opening and closing on most trims nowadays too. What more could you ask for? As if you needed another reason to love those doors, they're also huge. So whether you need to buckle a kid into the back or climb in yourself, it's about as convenient as it gets. One of the most common complaints about minivans is that you can't get them with all-wheel drive. Glossing over the fact that GM used to sell all-wheel drive minivans up until about 15 years ago, the Toyota Sienna has been available with 4-wheel traction for the better part of 2 decades, and it's a hybrid now too. But it's not alone, and you can get the Chrysler Pacifica with all-wheel drive these days. Okay, that's a couple to choose from, but the glass half full outlook is that's 50% of the segment. It's called progress, people, look it up. All kidding aside, is all-wheel drive a must-have in a minivan? Absolutely not, and it definitely doesn't give you an excuse to skip winter tires. But at least it's one less reason not to consider one given all the good stuff they're capable of. I personally think this one's a bit of a stretch, but I can see the benefits of having just a little more ground clearance, and that's something just about every big SUV has going for it compared to minivans. Just take a look at the Toyota lineup. The Highlander rides a good 1.5 inches higher than the Sienna, and the 4Runner is 3.5 inches higher. That means making easier work of rough cottage road or even less stress after a heavy snowfall. Minivans may be able to fit more stuff inside than most SUVs, but they can't come close to towing as much. When you look down the line at the minivans we have left on the market, most are good to pull 3,500 pounds. But if you look at the average gas-powered 3-row SUV, you get 5,000 pounds of towing capacity, and the big ones like the Tahoe or Ford Expedition can pull 8,000 pounds or more. 3,500 pounds is still plenty for a little utility trailer or even a pop-up camper, but if you're serious about towing, then SUVs have the upper hand. I hate to say it, but the smear campaign has been effective. I don't worry too much about how people feel about what I drive. I'm 6'3", I weigh 250 pounds, and I own a 95 Mazda Miata, which is about as close to gorilla in a phone booth as it gets. But I can understand why the incessant trash talk about minivans being lame can be deafening. Who knows what the future holds when your kids could one day turn their noses up at what they grew up with, like so many of you have done with minivans, but for the time being, sport utilities are safe from being stigmatized. I gotta admit, I'm still on Team Minivan, but I do think that was a pretty fair assessment of the pros and cons of both. But ultimately, none of that matters because it's up to you to decide which one makes more sense for your family, so get out there and drive. And while you're at it, don't forget about the humble wagon either. Long live the long roof.